Today we're going to talk about and demonstrate Cloud Migrator. Cloud Migrator is our solution to migrate data to the iManage Cloud, cloudimanage.com, or iManage on premises. Migrations may include a consolidation, or Cloud Migrator may be used just for consolidation. There are always considerations, and some of these are typical, some turn out to be atypical, but usually, from the partner perspective, how long is this going to take? What kind of billable hours do I need to, associate with this? How much expertise do we need on our team and handling bad data? How do we do deltas, or do we wait until the very end? And what are some of the complex and interesting scenarios that can come up, especially if you're migrating an environment that's been around, an iManage environment that's been around for a very long time? The health check is a free standalone application. Um, all you need to do is request a license key, and you can do that by emailing partners@latera.com. And it's a group of queries that goes out and checks various types of information in the iManage database, in an iManage database. And things are returned that are not necessarily always germane to the Cloud Migrator project, but they're important to know about your customer's environment. And then there are specific query results that absolutely reflect things that you're going to find when you do a migration. And it's good to know in advance, do they have legacy folders? Do they have documents in the flat space? Are there disabled users? All these things have an impact. Cloud Migrator is a proven solution in the industry. Um, well over 290 migrations, over 2.8 billion documents migrated, and so far, the largest migration included 227 million documents. File shares and migrations from other DMSs are not specifically supported out of the box. One of our partners kindly provided a information on the scripts they use to populate the staging database for an eDocs to iManage Cloud conversion in a document, which, with their permission, may be passed on to other partners if you're interested. So let us know if you would like to take a look at that document. We've worked with several partners to provide custom scripts to populate the staging database with file share data as well. And that's pretty complicated, as you would um, I wouldn't say it's so much it's complicated, it's somewhat arduous because, as you know, file shares are rarely organized in a really neat um, client matter structure. But generally, we work with partners directly on a project by project basis. Question may come up. Can I migrate to an on-premises iManage environment for testing? Absolutely. Configure a work server with the latest version available from iManage and disconnect any databases from the server that will not be involved in the migration. So as you can see, we have a three-step process. And from the source database, we migrate the metadata in your source iManage database to the staging database. And this is what you would go directly to if there was another DMS or file share. You need to populate the required tables in that database. Uh, the table structure doesn't exactly, and we'll take a look at this, doesn't exactly reflect the exact schema of iManage, but instead we aggregate like tables so that you're going into, you don't have to do a lot of joins. The information is already in aggregate for, say, documents, security, workspaces, folders, things like that. And from the staging database, we're synchronizing from here to there. Most of your fixes, not all, but most of the fixes take place here. Sometimes you find something in the source and you want to go back and fix it there and then resync to staging. And that's really the beauty of um, Cloud Migrator is that this process is iterative. So you can go through and synchronize things, whether it's from source to staging or staging to destination. And if you find something, even in the destination, that's amiss, you can go back and do a resync, fix it and resync it. And this is not uncommon in Cloud Migrator. The most common data problems are, bad folder metadata, it's missing, uh, things that should be secure are not secure, or they're in the wrong place. Spacing and null values, we actually take care of that automatically when we're synchronizing. We will deal with leading and trailing spaces and get rid of them. Missing users in document history. Actually, it's missing users who are only in document history. If a user has been removed instead of disabled, um, that won't show up in DocMaster. So any document you try to synchronize is going to fail. So what we do is one of our queries, out of the box queries that we'll have, and we'll show these to you in the demo, goes out and finds all of the um, user IDs that exist in history but don't appear in DocMaster. And we have a fix it query for that. We have queries that find things and we have queries that transform and fix things. Occasionally there'll be a user ID that's missing from both. So what you end up having to do is creating kind of a um, sort of common user ID, because you don't know, unless you really don't know who it was that is the author of that document or the user that for that document. Documents in the flat space. If an environment allows users to remove documents from folders, there are other reasons why this can happen. You really want to clean that up. Our transformation scripts for documents in the flat space, as well as, and the same is true of legacy folders. Our transformation scripts include options. So you don't just have to take one road. For instance, documents in the flat space, you can choose to dump everything that matches the client matter but doesn't have a corresponding folder with a matching doc class. You can choose to dump all of those into a default folder. Or you can create folders based on the document type of the flat space documents and create separate folders. And for legacy folders, we have a similar solutions where you can create a folder for all of the legacy folders, or workspace, excuse me, for all of the legacy folders. Or you can, if you have some way of identifying, you can kind of parse those out. What do we strive to do with Cloud Migrator? You have to do migrations while there's still you can't do it all at once while there's still an active environment out there. And so how do we do that? We do that with deltas. Um, Once we have, periodically throughout a project, we really encourage partners at least once a week, and in very large organizations, perhaps more often, to do deltas. So that if something changed in the source system while you're doing this project, you can then synchronize it on a periodic basis. What do I mean by that? New documents, new updated documents, updated profiles, changes to the metadata, so that once you are at that endpoint where you're doing your last delta, it is truly an exact representation of that point in time. Pre-migration pre-migration data cleanups. Um, we'll be looking at those find scripts and transform scripts. You know, get this stuff cleaned up because you are not going to be able to clean it up once you go to cloud. And consolidation, we found that that Cloud Migrator was a great product for consolidation, whether it's on premises or as a part of going to cloud. Just a little thought about Cloud Migrator used as a part of consolidation is that if I have three libraries, I can use Cloud Migrator to consolidate them to, say, a single library in iManage Cloud. In this case, each library needs a staging database so that you can work in, on those one at a time, and you have to deal with one library at a time. There are other variations of this where I want to consolidate the US libraries to a US active, and I'm just going to consolidate and migrate from London to a library called US active, UK active. Okay, and now we're ready to take a look at Cloud Migrator. We're going to start our demo of Cloud Migrator. And Cloud Migrator is an application you don't actually have to install. You can put it anywhere. You just unzip it, you download it from the support site, and you just open it up, you know, unzip it. I happen to have mine on my desktop, but it doesn't really matter where you put it. So to use Cloud Migrator, you will be provided with a key. You'll need to provide information, an email address, and then someone will send you back a key. I've already activated my key. So when it opens up, it defaults to an existing Cloud Migrator projects, or I can look one up. They're all stored, and you can change the storage location. They're all stored in a default location, or I can create a new migration, which is what I'm going to do. So the first thing it walks you through is, you know, what servers are you using? How are you authenticating? What you're connecting to? I'm going to use SQL Server authentication, but you can use Windows authentication. What do I want? Where's the source from which I'm going to migrate? And that's going to be my active database. What's the schema version? Anything between 8.5 and up to 9.1 is going to be 8.5. Anything over 9.1 you're going to choose 9.1. And you have to have an an active ODBC connection to use for the source DMS. Now, what's the database that will store the staging data? And so in the process, as we saw in the intro slides, metadata from your source library, in this case active, is going to be migrated to a staging database. And from that, it's organized into schema organization, but it is aggregate. The tables are aggregated so that there are not as many of them, not as many joins if you're going to do queries or updates. And in this case, I'm going to use the same server. You would generally not in a migration of any size, but I am going to do that. So once I set that, it just defaults. And what is my staging database? Happily, it's called staging. You can name this whatever you want. And basically, when if this database didn't exist, I would be prompted. It already exists. All you need to do is create a database that is, it could be, if you have multiple libraries, you might call this staging San Francisco or staging US, so that you can tell the difference between them. And you want your staging database when you create it to be, it doesn't have to be as big, it doesn't have to be as large, but you need, as the source database, but you need to set it up so that it will grow appropriately. So don't set it up as being too small, but set it up so that it can grow, because it will be growing as you add data to it. How am I going to identify this project? And where do I want to save it? This is the default. This is the users, and the username documents my migrations, but you can change that location. So we've successfully completed the wizard to set it up. And since I created the database, it's just a plain SQL database. It's going to have to create a schema, and all I do is click on yes. Now, what it is doing in the source tab is that it is populating the categories, the high level categories of the things that we're going to, how we're going to populate the information in the staging database. We have a lot of subcategories under here, very detailed, but these are the basic categories. So first, before we do that, I'm going to go quickly through the file menu, the pull down menus on top. Create a new migration, open an existing migration, anything that's recent, close and exit. The application has an application log, so if you run into an issue with the application itself, you can take a look at the log, and if you need to open a support ticket, then you can attach that log to your ticket to allow the support folks to take a look at it. Now, database source and database staging. Basically, once you set up a migration, as I did, you're not going to touch this. You're not going to reset the migration tables midstream. Tools. Staging statistics give you a count of everything that's in the staging database for all these categories. I told you that this is basically the, exploding these 4 categories into all the individual things that we are tracking and making changes to throughout the course of a migration. And you can export this if you want to review it, say in Excel. We haven't gotten into this part of it yet, but updating cloud users and bulk deletion options. Migration settings. It starts out with, for one, there are settings that you can apply for each library that you're migrating. You can set a global offset number. You can also, if need be, set them specifically. And you remember, if you have multiple libraries, you want that global offset number to differ so that you don't run into any conflict with any of the other libraries. The option to purge documents from the trash bin after deletion. The default user password. This is the one that's generated by the application, but you can also put in something customized. Do you want to retain the preferred database? Now, we have the ability to go through and identify, as I mentioned, when you run the health check, as I mentioned in the slide presentation. We have the ability to go in and find, characters in user names and group names that don't, that might be unfriendly in Windows. But we also have a way to allow special characters and spaces in group IDs. Sometimes those are important. Much of the time they're not, but if you have a situation where that is important, then you can set this to allow those spaces. And options. One of the things as you're running synchronizations that you can do is to change some of these things on the fly. So how many connections, the timeout limits for job queries, status queries, and connections, you can change those on the fly if you need to. The same is true of performance. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind is that iManage does not create folders in bulk. It will do them either 1 or 2 at a time. I would leave this setting as it is, but the rest of them, you can poke them up and adjust them according to the resources on the machine. If you find things going too slowly, you can bring it back down. Settings for temp tables, max entries per upload for history. This can be a really important setting. It's always important because history is always so exponentially much bigger than everything else. Options for migration itself. And things that you can do. For instance, if you do have an issue and you need more information, you can turn on debugging. If you are working with, a copy of a database and there's no certificate per se, then you can just accept any certificate, invalid or not, valid or not. And you can disable migration status in the UI. Some of these we'll take a look at once we've done some synchronizations. Under help, if you need to activate the application, that's getting your key, and then about gives you the build number that you're using. So let's get on to syncing. When you click on syncing to staging, you get a list of everything. These are all the things that we're synchronizing to staging. I wouldn't run them all. We don't recommend that you run them at the same time. One of the reasons for that is to sometimes there are items that will kind of catch up. For instance, I might just uncheck this and come back and do it later. But you should be able to, in smaller or medium sizes, you should be able to synchronize these at the same time. And now here's a place where I'm probably, I ran into something that Money, I'll take this section out and change it, that Money informed me about, that sometimes you have to reset the schema manually. I understood, he told me that in this version that I'm running, you don't have to do it table by table, but I think I'm going to have to go ahead and do that before we move on to the next section. And in fact, you can't actually cancel this if you have that issue. So I went ahead and reran the synchronization, and everything in those broad categories was under new, and it's now been transferred to imported. Let's take a look at the log. When you click on the options column, there are two entries. Steps actually comes in and is more useful when you get to the syncing to cloud part. But log will give you all the items. And if you have any errors, you can filter by label. In this case, it's just info for all of them. And one thing is true of all logs that you'll find in Cloud Migrator is that for each of them, they allow you to filter. And in this one, you would probably filter for a specific error in the message. If you had, specific errors about a type of custom field, then you might want to just look for errors that matched particular text. But you can always by values or label, and then you're able to export this. And all logs can be exported in a log or CSV format. Steps, as I said, has a little bit more value in the when you get to syncing, but it still can tell you an awful lot. When I click on steps, here are all the items that I synchronized and their status. If this was an error, I can click into and ultimately find that it's going to show up elsewhere, but I'll get more detail when I sync to cloud. So once you've synchronized, then you can go in and start checking things in the staging database. And we're going to take a look at that right now. In fact, I'll show you what changes, some of which are temporary and some of which are affect throughout the migration. So in staging, you can see that after, I created a blank database and we created tables here. So as I said, we don't recreate the iManage schema, but we aggregate iManage common tables. For instance, we have, doc classes. We have a documents table. In fact, I'm going to take a look at that specifically. So if you take a look at the column names, they're very, they're all related back to iManage, so that if you're creating any queries, you don't have to worry about, what the column names are called. So everything in here looks a lot like DocMaster, but when we get to the end of the table, end of the columns, we'll see that there are things that we've added. This is where you would enter specific offset numbers if you did not set a global offset. And this is where you can make corrections in this table or any of these other tables. We have one for .classes. If we go to flat space document mapping, let's take a look and see what that one looks like. So if you are creating, there's a couple of different things that you can do, and we'll look at those scripts. If you have flat space documents, there are a couple of ways that you can resolve that because you can't take them to cloud. And this is a table we create to show the mapping and the flat space legacy mapping. In addition, we create some temporary tables in every source database. And this allows us to keep track of things that we've synced. And if there needs to be a change made to something that has already been synced, then we know where it is in the destination. So that's why we put these CAM temp tables in here. So let's talk about, before we get into syncing to cloud, let's talk about scripts. And we'll talk about deltas as well, but let's start with scripts. So there are cleanup scripts, exact scripts, load scripts, schema, and transform. So the schema sets the schema for all the tables. The extract is extracting from, remember, which schema are you using, 8.5 to 9.1 or 9.1 and above. And all of these can be modified. Let's take a look at the transform scripts. There are two categories of transform scripts. One is finding things, and these are the default scripts that we include for finding empty folders, for finding flat space documents, missing users, unused groups, etc. So if I go ahead and double click this, or it should open. Yep, it's going to open up in SQL. I can find if I go to, I'm going to actually do this in active. No, we'll do this in staging. These are groups. Actually clicked on the wrong one. Flat space doc mapping. And this is what you would populate. So if we go back to missing users is always another one. And execute this. So I have 3 missing users. This means for the last 2 that there is an entry in doc history with the correct user ID, but there's no entry in the doc user table for a particular document. Same thing is true with the user policy verification. And in this case, there's a user missing from both DocMaster and from doc history. So that's the find it script, an example of the find it script. A transform script is under update. So I've found the missing users. So how am I going to resolve that? So here is the resolution script for missing users. And again, these things can be modified. So if I go ahead and run this, 3 rows affected. And so any documents that were affected by that missing user are not going to fail. For the one item that didn't appear in doc history or DocMaster, in doc history or in DocMaster, I would have to put in a default user ID because it doesn't exist anywhere. And that would resolve that third where it was blank, that third item where it's blank. Other scripts that we can, for things that we can find, empty folders. So you make a choice, does the firm want to delete any empty folders in the workspaces? Flat space documents. These are all modifiable. And for flat space and legacy, there are a couple of different options that you have. Flat space, you can elect to go through and find everything that matches the client matter. And if it does match a folder doc class, then go ahead and import it into that folder. bring it into that folder. But what if it doesn't match the dot class, but it matches everything else? And this will find those flat space documents. The transform script, the fix-it script, will go in and you can make choices. Well, I want everything that matches the folder to go into the folder. But if it matches everything else, but not the folder, do I want to A, create a folder for every single document that doesn't match an existing dot class folder? Or B, do I want to create a single folder and just dump all the ones that match client matter but nothing else into that folder? So the fix-it script gives you options. Find 0-byte files. You can't really do anything about those, but you should know what they are. Unused metadata, unused grouped, missing users, and the update scripts that can be modified for each of these. Now I'm going to skip going through and fixing everything. So I'm going to have some stuff that doesn't work in my synced cloud. So I'm going to switch over to the cloud tab. Now we require that you log in because you may have multiple libraries that you're dealing with. So we want you to log in to a specific library. So this is going to be a session. If you're SSO, you would use common, and I'm train VM2, and this is going to be, it's going to be cloud admin. So it immediately says, this is your target library. If it's not listed above, you're going to have to, you may have the wrong user ID, or you may not be, connected to that, but it makes you choose a library to make sure that you're not working on one that's not ready. So it gives me the information, it gives me the version, it gives me the library name, and it also populates my broad categories. So I'm going to go ahead and click on settings. And here's where you can make some of those settings from the tools that you might want to, take effect when you're running these synchronizations. So when I click on sync, it gives me that same kind of, these are all the things that you're going to be synchronizing, but there's kind of a logic to this that's pretty important. So I'm going to show everything. We have categories, and we really strongly recommend that you follow these unless there's some reason not to, and not do all. So the first thing we recommend is that you use validated fields, users, and groups, because if any of those items are invalid, then anything you try to migrate with that invalid information isn't going to work. And it automatically clicks off the applicable items. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And I think I'm pretty sure I'm going to have some issues in here. On one of these items, yep. So we've got the metadata objects, class migration, application type. I know this is an invalid parameter for application type. Users. And it gives you some kind of general ideas in this log. You can also make this bigger. Okay, so we can see that. Let's take a look at you can also look at the steps from here for each of these items. And if I see skipped, it's going to give me a message as to why that was skipped. And if I go into the object itself, you get even more information. And sometimes it's for things that may already exist. So let's go with, I think I had a nice Those are all created. Let's look at type. Yeah. So remember, I identified for sure that I had 2 issues at least on application types. So if we take a look at the object, and I think it might be this one where this T alias, and I've seen this, it doesn't hurt when you're in your current environment, but cloud just won't accept this. So I'd have to go back and correct that, resync it, and then sync that information to cloud. If we take a look at this message, it just gives us the information about, why that occurred. And this is for each of the items. I have 2 of these, and they're the same issue. So what you do is you either go back to, if I go back to jobs, I can look at these in this order through the log and find the items that were errored, or I can go to steps again from here. Oops, clicked on the wrong one. For each of the categories, instead of looking at it on this screen. And if we take a look at users, see if there's any issues. Invalid parameter. So I would need to go and take a look at this particular item if I didn't know right off the bat what the problem was, and address that in my source. So more than anything else, the way to think about Cloud Migrator is it's not anything like a lift and shift. It is an iterative process, because especially if somebody's had the DMS for a long time, they're going to run into, old stuff. Maybe they used to allow the remove from folder. Maybe they used to allow certain things that the cloud is just not going to, aren't acceptable when you move to cloud, that don't work. So you can go back and clean those up. You may find more. You can go back and fix those, resync these. So you don't end up with a bunch of problems already in the cloud, or things that you can't synchronize. So that was just one category. I'm going to go back and do a couple more of these and choose the next section. Containers, which covers workspaces. So let's just do these. I won't spend a lot of time looking at them. We'll just run them. And again, this one's still running. Oh, what is it running? Yeah, folders. Invalid profile. So when I go into the steps, it's going to identify each of the items. They're probably going to be similar, or they may be similar. And I'll be able to identify them and go back in to the source and fix them. Resync to staging, and then resync to cloud. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, and it tells me what I've done. So we're going to go back to, I'm going to skip documents for the moment. I'm going to do my matters. And again, when I choose that, it chooses all the relevant information about subscription, security, category, and shortcuts for my matters, which is relatively frequently feature that we've added or augmented, because we were moving my matters before, but we have changed that. So as you can see, as I work through these categories, I get an update on my migrated and failed items. So 1 here, 8 here, not too bad. Of course, this is not reality based in terms of the size and the complexity. So let's do my favorites again. Shouldn't take too long. And just a couple more categories, and then I'll not do doc history, just because you can always wait on that one. Sometimes you can make that the last thing you do, because how much larger it is than other things. So let's see, recents, I think, is the last one. And then I will go back. So I don't have any documents done and I don't have doc history, but I am going to go back and do documents. So the things that didn't fail are in my cloud environment, in my cloud active library. And so what remains, I'm not stuck worrying about things that failed and I have no way to take care of them, but I can go back and find all of those things. There are logs for every one of them. I can export those logs to a CSV and work from that and go back and fix things, resync them, sync them to cloud. Now, while this is running, let's talk a little bit about deltas. Depending on the size, we always recommend that, on a periodic basis that you run deltas, because we can update things. Remember, in the source database, we keep information about things that have changed in the source. So you can run a delta sync as frequently as you want to, but as a general rule, we recommend that you run delta syncs on a weekly basis. It also means that you don't end up on that last week push before go live with a huge amount of things to migrate into cloud. Hopefully it's really small and you're just picking up the last little bits of the things that you have to finish. And while it's running, I'll mention legacy folders. Similar to flat space folders, where there are a couple of options, flat space files, a couple of options that you have. We have something for legacy folders. Legacy folders, in case you've never encountered them before, were between classic profile-based iManage and matter-centric based iManage, where it allowed you, if you look in the iManage Explorer, one of the classic clients, you'll see that there's a My Folders and an Other Folders and a My Workspaces and an Other Workspaces. So you were able to create folders pretty much on demand by an individual and add documents to them. You could identify them. You could add users that had access to those. And it didn't require that you apply really any metadata like client matter. And so it got pretty wild west. So it's somewhat limited what we can do with those, but we do have a couple of options. We can create a workspace for all of them. And if you have huge amounts, you might not want to consider that, but then we can also create multiple workspaces for those. If there's any kind of sort of organization, or you can identify a group of legacy folders. So there we are. We've got the documents. I have some failures. You can access from, again, all of the object IDs are available to me. And when I click into one of those IDs, I get information about the document itself, and I can go back and fix them. Now, if there are any questions, of course, please let us know.